Learn these 20 essential functions and you can do 95% of your work in Excel. Here's a walkthrough of all 20, including a downloadable reference guide for you to follow along with each example. Welcome to Sele Training. To get you started on learning the essential functions for Excel, please download the reference guide listed in the description below this video. You're welcome and encouraged to copy and distribute this spreadsheet. The reference guide has a separate tab for each Excel function. For each function, it includes the function name and parameters used, a description, a link to the specific point in this video where the function is explained, a sample list of values and their results when the function is applied to them, additional notes, and a link to further help on the Microsoft Office support site. Let's get started. The SUM function. The SUM function adds numbers from specified cells or a range of cells. For example, we can do the sum of B7, B8, and B9. And the result is 15. You can also select a range of cells, B7 through B13, and the result is 35. It updates automatically, so if you change a number, it'll reflect those differences. Note, you can use a range of numbers. They can be vertical or horizontal, and empty cells and text values are ignored. Also, if you go to the bottom of a list, you can press Alt plus equals, and it fills in the sum and automatically detects the spaces above it that you have data. If you put numbers to the right and do Alt equals, it sums horizontally and gives you the results. The average function. The average function calculates the arithmetic mean of a set of numbers from specified cells or a range of cells. For example, if we want the average of B7, B8, and B9, the result is 5. You can also do the average of a range, B7 through B13. Note that you can use a range of numbers that can be vertical or they can be horizontal. And empty cells and text values are ignored. The round function. The round function rounds numbers to a specified number of digits. For example, if we want to round 123.6 to 0 digits, it's going to round it up to 124. And likewise, if we round 123.3, it's going to round down to 123. You can specify the number of digits, in this case 23.847. Let's round that to 2 digits. And it rounds it off to 23.85, taking into account the second digit. You can also use negative numbers in the round function. Let's round this number to -1. That's rounding it to the nearest 10, so it takes 23.847 and rounds down to 20. Also note that you can check out the round down and round up functions if you want to control whether the rounding is up or down. The if function. The if function is very handy when comparing text strings. For example, we can check if this name equals this name. And if it is, put a 1 in there, and if it's not, put a 0. And it determined that these are the same. You don't have to have a 1 or a 0. You can have a yes or a no answer. We'll copy this down and apply the same function to these, and you can see that no, they do not match. You can also apply the same thing to numbers. Let's determine if this number is greater than this number. And if it is, we're going to take this number minus this number, and if it's not, we'll fill in 0. So you can see that 9 is greater than 4, and the difference is 5. So you can use a combination of conditional testing as well as a calculated result. The if function works with numbers, dates, text, or a variety of different data. Note, if the logical test is invalid, it'll return a value or name error. The if function becomes more powerful when you combine it with other complex conditional statements or complex result calculations. The COUNTIF function. The COUNTIF function counts the number of cells within a range that meet a given condition. It's very similar to the if function, except it just gives you the count of the ones that match the criteria. For example, we can do the COUNTIF of this range where the values equals green. And there's 2. You could also COUNTIF this range where the value is greater than 8. And there's 3. A more complex COUNTIF for this range is where they do not combine with C8, means that they will not equal 8. And there's 5. You can also use wildcards. So let's find the ones in this range that equal anything. Notice it finds 6, and it doesn't count the blank. The other wildcard character is a question mark. So let's find ones in this range that begin with a B with 3 characters after that. And there's 2, blue and blue. Notice it didn't pick up black because it's 5 characters long instead of 4. So let's do a COUNTIF of everything in this range. It starts with B and any number of characters after that. And that time it does pick up black. Note the criteria must always be in quotes, and the criteria ignores upper and lower case. And the COUNTIF can be as complex as the if function with the conditional statements. The SUMIF function. The SUMIF function adds cells specified by a given condition or criteria. For example, we can do a SUMIF of these range of values where they are greater than 9. And it gives you the sum of only the numbers that are greater than 9. We can also do a SUMIF by looking at these values for the ones that are blue, but the sum is going to be of this range of data. And it gives you the sum of only the blue items. We can do the same thing where they're not blue. And note the criteria must always be in quotes, and it ignores upper and lower case. It's better to use a named range so it's easier to copy formulas. And the range and the summing range do not have to be the same size. For example, I'm going to do the SUMIF, but only select the first 2 that are blue and include the entire sum range. But it only counts the first blue, not the second one, because I only included these first 2 in the range. The SUMIF function can use very complex ranges, criterias, and summing ranges, and it also allows wildcard characters. The rank function. The rank function returns the rank of a number in a list of numbers. More recently, rank.avg and rank.eq are used to be more accurate. For example, if I want to rank these numbers in this list, and I'm going to hit F4 here to make these an absolute reference, so when I copy the formula down, it does not change the range. It gives us a result in descending order, starting with 9 at the top to 2 at the bottom. Notice that 5 is duplicated and there is no 6. That's because these 2 numbers are the same. We can use the third parameter for order. If you put a 1 in there, it makes all these in ascending order, starting with the lowest, going up to the highest. Rank AVG gives you a slightly different view of the data. Again, I'm going to select to rank this number in this list, F4, copy that down, and you'll notice that it does an average of the two duplicate numbers as 5.5. It still skips 6 and goes right to 7. And rank EQ you'll notice that the numbers in rank.eq are the same as rank, and that is by design. It's essentially a replacement for the old rank that's going to go away. So now you have rank EQ, which is traditionally the same, and rank AVG if you want to do the average of the duplicate values. Note that the order can be 0 or omitted if you want descending order. Any other number in there makes it ascending order. The today function. The today function returns the current date formatted as a date. For example, just enter today and it returns the current date. You can also use it in a formula. Today plus 5. If you want to know the day, use the day function with today, and it returns the day of the month. Use the month function, and it returns the month of that date. Use date value to convert a text date into a date, and we can subtract that from today. And that says there's 192 days between today and 12/25/2019. Note, today is updated automatically when you open or refresh a spreadsheet, so it will recalculate on its own. And the day or month values must be formatted as a number rather than a date if you want them to show properly. The date function. The date function returns a number that represents the date in Excel. For example, let's take a look at the date for this year, this month, and this day. And it returns a number starting with 1 at January 1st, 1900. Now you can take that and format it as a date, and now you get a date representation of that number. You can also do the reverse. I want to take the year of this date, and it's 2019. You can take the month of that same date, and it's 11, and I can take the day, and it's 17. Note, you have to make sure the format of the cells is correct so that it switches between numbers or date formats. The VLOOKUP function. The VLOOKUP function looks for a value in a table and then returns the value from the column you specify. For example, if we want to look up these values in this table and return the results, you would use the VLOOKUP function like this. I'm going to look up this value in this table, and I always recommend hitting F4 here to make sure it's an absolute reference so that if you copy this formula somewhere else, it won't change the table. I'm going to pick from column 2, which is the sales column, and I'm going to use false. I always recommend using false. If you use true, it's designed to do a close match, and it gives you very unpredictable results. So I recommend using false in all cases. Hit enter, and it looked up John in this table and returned 324 from the sales column. Now we can copy this down for Fred, and with the absolute references, it kept the table the same and looked up Fred's sales to get 490. Note that the lookup value always has to be the leftmost column of your table. So in this case, the names are in the very first column. If it's not in that column on the table by default, then just copy that column over so that it's the first one. Also note that if nothing is found, you'll get an NA error. And this description states that it must be sorted in ascending order. That's only true if you use the range lookup value of true, and I recommend using false in all cases, so you don't have to sort your table. And if you specify a column beyond the columns available in the table, you'll get a ref error. The find function. The find function returns the starting position of one text string within another. It's very similar to search with some small differences, which we'll talk about. You can also replace text within another string, and we'll talk about that as well. For example, if we want to find the word is in this text, it finds it beginning at position 3. We can also say find is in that text starting at position 5, and it finds it in position 6. That's the second reference to those two letters. If you try to find capital IS in that text, it'll return the value error because it is case sensitive. Search is very similar. We want to search for is in this text. It also finds it in position 3. Let's try something that search does differently. Let's search for is. That means it searches for the word is with anything following it. You can also use question marks to represent specific characters. For example, if I search for question mark is, it's going to find it starting in position 1. That's where two letters and is are found. You can also replace text. So I'm going to replace the old text, which is that, starting in position 9 for a length of 1 with the lettering the. And it has replaced the letter A with the. I can replace this text starting at 11 for a length of 0 with the word new and a space. And it essentially adds the word new inside of that text. Note that if the start number is omitted, it is assumed to be 1. And as I mentioned, wild characters can be the question mark or the asterisk. The main difference between find and search is that search allows wildcards and is not case sensitive. The concatenate function. The concatenate function joins several text strings into one string. For example, I can combine B7 and C7. Now we prefer to have a space there, so let's just add that to the statement as well. B7, a space, and C7. How about the reverse name? With a comma. Concatenate is very similar to the ampersand. I want to combine B7 with an ampersand and a space and an ampersand and C7. It accomplishes the same thing. You can also use concatenate to combine numbers. Note that if you type in any text, you want to make sure to use quotes around it, but that's not required for numbers. And if you get a name error, that usually means the quote marks are missing where you need them. The trim function. The trim function removes all the extra spaces from a text string, including the ones between words and at the end. For example, we want to trim this sentence. You'll see that it removed extra spaces in between the words, and anything that's on the end's been removed as well. Note, trim is often used in conjunction with length, left, mid, and right to modify text. The length function. The length function returns the number of characters in a text string. For example, we want to take the length of this text string. It returns 19. Now note, it counts spaces in between words as well as added on to the end. So we'll do the length of the trim of that text, and you'll see that it removed 5 spaces by doing the trim function. Note, length is often used in conjunction with trim left, mid, and right to modify text. The left and right functions. The left function returns the specified number of characters from the left side of a text string, and the right function returns the specified number of characters from the end of the string. For example, we take the left of this, 4 characters, it returns the first word this. And if we do the right of this 4 characters, it returns test. Note, the left and right is often used in conjunction with trim and mid to modify text, but use mid if you need to start in the middle of the text string. The mid function. The mid function returns the characters from the middle of a text string, given a starting position and the length. For example, if we want to take the mid of this text string, starting at 6 characters for a length of 2, it returns the word is. Now note, if the starting number exceeds the length of the text, it returns nothing. And if the starting number plus the number of characters exceeds the entire length of the text, it actually returns the characters up to the end of the text, so you don't have to worry about going over. For example, if I take the mid of that text string, starting at 25 for a length of 3, it returns nothing because 25 is past the length of that text. But if I return the mid of that text starting at 6 for a length of 25, it returns the remaining portion of that text. The upper and lower functions. The upper and lower functions converts all the text string to uppercase or all to lowercase. A related function called proper converts it to proper case with the first letter in each word uppercase and all the other letters lowercase. For example, the upper of this text, there's all caps. Do the same thing with lower. It's all lowercase. And if we do proper, it converts everything to proper case. Note that numbers are ignored. The min and max functions. The min and max functions returns the smallest value in a set of values, or it returns the largest value in a set of values. For example, the min of B9, B10, and B11 is 3, because that's the minimum amount of those 3 numbers. You can also use a range of numbers, and it'll show you the minimum from that list. You can also use a combination of a range and a set number. Max function works similar. Max of B9, B10, or B11 is 8. A range works the same way. And a max range against another number also works. Note, empty cells and text values are ignored. The and or functions. The and or functions are logical functions that return a true or false result. And checks whether all arguments are true, and if they are, it returns the true value. Or checks to see if any of the arguments are true, and returns true or false. For example, if we want to check to see if B9 is greater than 2 and B10 is greater than 2, both conditions are true, so it returns the true result. You can do multiple conditions. You can do formulas. Or works the same way. And in this case, only one of the arguments is true, but with the or, either one's true, and the result is true. You can also combine the two. Note to also check out the NOT function, which works similar to AND and OR. The IFERROR function. The IFERROR function returns the value if error if an expression is an error and the value of the expression itself otherwise. For example, if we're doing a valid expression and we're checking for the if error on this number divided by this number, if it's valid, it'll leave the result. If it's not, we're going to print error. And it's valid, so it leaves us the result of 100 divided by 25, which is 4. If we take this same formula and copy it down here, 200 divided by 0 gives you divide by 0 error. And so our IFERROR function prints error. In this case, we have a value error because I'm trying to find the word the in this text and it's not there. So it gives you the value error. So you can use the IFERROR function to check for errors. If that is an error, then print error. Note that the IFERROR function will evaluate errors of all these different types. Hey, if you want to see more videos like this one, please subscribe. And if you've enjoyed this video, be sure to click the thumbs up and leave a comment. I really do appreciate your support.